The Baltimore Ravens offense appears ready for takeoff. We talk about why and so much more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens. We're your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes over in video form on YouTube and audio form, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We're a 5-day-a-week Ravens podcast here, Monday through Friday. Also, of course, going live for bonus episodes after every Ravens game and any piece of big news that happens. We bring in the best daily Ravens coverage out there, and I really appreciate all the support. You can subscribe both video and audio form. It's the same show, so you're not missing out either way. If you want to watch one day and then listen another, you can also subscribe to the Locked On Ravens Insider Group on Subtext. That'll be in the link to the description below. So Ravens news, analysis, updates, we have you covered here on Locked On Ravens. And if you're an everydayer, I appreciate you for tuning in every single day. For somewhere in the middle, welcome in. And if you're just new to the channel here, to you also welcome in. So really exciting stuff here because the Ravens, they're a 7-2 football team. They dismantled the Seattle Seahawks 37-3 in week 9. And it's a really exciting time for this franchise because the vibes seem to be back. The vibes really seem to be at an all-time high right now. And today we're going to be talking about the offense a little bit because that's been the talk of town, honestly, with how they've been playing this year, the inconsistency, but that 37-3 win, there was plenty of consistency in what the Ravens did on offense on Sunday. And it seems like there might have been that breakthrough we talked about with Kadri Ismail last week. So we'll get into that in the first part of the show and get into some more offensive stuff in the second part, talking about complementary football with the offense and the defense, and look at the Ravens' big stretch that's upcoming a little bit as well. So let's get into the offense here. Again, 37 points put up by this Ravens team in week 9. I mean, I could go through all the stats. 29 first downs compared to the Seahawks 6, 298 rushing yards. But to me, there were a couple of areas where I found myself at least being encouraged. One of them was the play calling and just situational awareness of Todd Monken. I think Todd Monken has had really good games this year and really bad games this year. This one obviously was a really good one, but not just because, the offense is scoring point after point after point. I think that he took advantage of empty boxes and ran the football. And so while Lamar only had 187 yards passing, that to me showed that, you don't have to force feed these wide receivers. You don't have to force something down the field or force a trick play reverse. The Ravens just, Gus Edwards, boom, up the middle. Keaton Mitchell, boom, speediness, showed up the middle. I think Todd Monken called a really good game, and that's what I want to see a bit more of moving forward, because you could go back to week 8 against the Cardinals where it just didn't feel like Todd Monken got fully settled in that game and wasn't taking advantage of the looks that his offense was getting. So that's one area where I was really impressed, I'd say, just because I hadn't, we had seen that before, but I'm hopeful that can be a trend moving forward. I think another one is just the efficiency Lamar Jackson continues to play with. 21 of 26, did miss Rashad Bateman on a couple of deep shots, but the receivers look good. I know the production necessarily hasn't been there for them in terms of, they're not at 500 yards receiving. They don't have 6 touchdowns, right? That's, it's unfortunate, but I think Rashad Bateman, as he's gotten back from his injury, has looked really crisp in his routes. He understands where to go. I think he has improved. And that was probably, in my opinion, that was always going to happen because him coming back first off that injury, he has too much potential. I'm not saying he's going to be the best wide receiver in the league or anything. I think he has great potential still, but he has looked like he can contribute down the stretch in even more ways because he did beat his man twice he's a really good route runner. Coming out of college, he was known for his route running. And I think that kind of gets forgotten because of, one, the injuries, and two, Zay Flowers comes in and is literally like the most absurd route runner I've ever seen. not ever, but he's really, really good at it. So this Ravens group of wide receivers, they have good route. Odell has been a good route runner for his entire career. They have really solid route runners. And just because they aren't necessarily getting a ton of catches, getting a ton of yards, a ton of scores, doesn't mean they aren't contributing. It opens up the field for the run game. It opens up the field for Mark Andrews as well. Now, I think the reason this team is ready to take off offensively is because they've now laid the foundation. It's been 2 great weeks back-to-back at home. Their last 2 home games, again, the big storyline, 75-9 against 2 of the top teams in the NFC. So how can you build on that? Obviously, the fumbles are one. We talked about areas they can improve a bit yesterday. Fumbles definitely are one. You could call wide receiver production another, but I think that's lower on my list just because of what I mentioned of they're still doing good things and coming up clutch with some, whether it's Zay, Rashad, Odell, they're making plays. Now, I know that you may want to see a couple more, but I was very encouraged by this because it didn't have to be that way for the Ravens, where they could have just kind of cruised the entire game and not really take things that they were given, and maybe there were some mistakes, or at least more than we saw. But Baltimore, I think, is in a mode right now. They're motivated. They don't take this win and go, oh, all right, awesome, we played really well in this game, time to take the foot off the gas. It doesn't feel like they're doing that. Lamar, John Harbaugh, all these players have a common goal, and that is to win a Super Bowl. That is to win a championship. And in order for this team to win a championship, their offense essentially has to take off. But this is the trajectory that I was predicting. If you've been listening to me here every day on Locked On Ravens, you've listened to me before, I have said that it was always going to be a work in progress. It wasn't going to be 100% great off the bat in week 1. But this is when you want to start your peak. You don't want to peak right now, but you want to start that peak. We kind of got the glimpse of it in week 7 against Detroit, and now we're starting to see the upward ascent. Other things that are really great is the fact that Baltimore has been, outside of the first 3 weeks, pretty healthy. They got Tyler Linderbaum back and Ronnie Stanley, Rashad Bateman, Odell Beckham, Keaton Mitchell was out for a time. They've been getting guys back, and it's been good for them. But speaking of Stanley and Linderbaum, that offensive line, it all starts up front for me. The offensive line is incredible. In one word for this team, and we'll talk about this a bit more, but if you could describe this Ravens team in one word, just one, no cheating. I'll give you a second to think about it. One word for this Ravens team. I know what mine is. Physicality. Physicality is my word, and the offensive line certainly embodies that. This defense is flying around again. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But this offensive line over the past, honestly, couple of weeks, the initial pressure teams have gotten has been pretty non-existent. And part of look, you can say Lamar makes offensive lines look better. That is a true fact. But I want to give credit to Baltimore's line because they have done a really good job for the most part. I know Ronnie Stanley's had a couple of rough reps. I get that. But John Simpson at that left guard spot is bodying guys off the line and finishing plays. Tyler Linderbaum, the viral play of him getting out into space and cutting off defenders halfway up the field. Kevin Zeitler, the steady veteran, that they have good depth there too, with Patrick McCary filling in for Morgan Moses, both those guys playing well. So Baltimore's offensive line is the big thing. Lamar is Lamar. Lamar improves in offense. He is an incredible quarterback and honestly should be at the thick of the MVP conversation, in my opinion. But with what the Ravens have done offensively to start the year, I just think the consistency wasn't necessarily there for the most part. It's a big test in Week 10 against Cleveland. It'll tell us a lot, but I'm going to trust this offense. I've said that a lot, and I'm going to say that they are finally ready to take off. We're in November now. We're over halfway done with the season. They have to start to get their peak, and Week 9 was definitely a great step in the right direction there. Coming up in the second part of the show, though, we'll be talking about still the offense and how it's ready to take off, but also how that offense is complementing the defense and vice versa. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on the show. First, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. And if you're looking for daily fantasy sports, look no further than PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the most fun. So many have happening up to 25 times their money this football season. All you have to do is select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. And basketball season is here. And with PrizePicks, you can now pick combo projections across both football and basketball from the Specials League. So that's a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players in different sports or leagues. For example, maybe you're a big Lakers fan or LeBron James fan. You can have a LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions. And you can play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz. You can now find community plays under the promo tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. So this week, maybe for the Ravens and Browns game, you want to pick Lamar Jackson to go for more than his projected yard total, or maybe Odell Beckham more than his projected touchdown total. He continues on last week and builds upon that. And PrizePicks offers this really awesome thing. It's a reboot policy. So that means that even if one of your players gets injured for football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and doesn't return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance policy. And they have quick withdrawals over on PrizePicks, easy game plan, enormous selection of players and stat types. That's what makes PrizePicks the number one daily fantasy sports app. So go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. We're back here. It's our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostraker still talking with you on this Taco Tuesday, as the Ravens are a 7-2 football team, tied for first place in the AFC conference. And a crazy stat, if the playoffs started today, all 4 teams would end up making the playoffs in the AFC North. I mean, how crazy is that? The fact that this North division is so tough, and we'll get to it in the final part of the show with the big stretch they have upcoming. Baltimore being 7-2, I think, is impressive for multiple different reasons. And that's with trying to get a new offensive system down, getting new pieces acclimated. And that's also why I think Baltimore's finally ready to kind of take this thing to the next level. I think a lot of good stuff was put on film. Lamar Jackson is dialed in. The running game looks really solid. I know we were talking about, what about Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs? But I think Baltimore does have a 3-headed, I guess, monster, if you want to call it that, with Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, and Keaton Mitchell because of the complementary aspect of each of those guys. And if you listen to me on the live show on Sunday or yesterday's Locked On Ravens episode, I kind of talked about this a little bit, and I'll just give a brief version here. Gus Edwards is your power back. Keaton Mitchell is your speed guy. Justice Hill is the man in the middle, the underrated bruiser, and the underrated speed guy. That's a really tough change of pace for defenses to adjust to, and I think it really helps Baltimore out a ton. You got pass-catching weapons. The offensive line is playing great. And part of this was just trying to Todd Monken figuring out his players, the players figuring out Todd Monken, Lamar Jackson with his freedom. It's all been a work in progress, especially with the injuries. But November was always the time when you wanted to start peaking. I think Baltimore maybe got a little bit of an early start. Now, again, you don't want to have your peak in November. It's when you want to have the ascent. You want to peak when you start playing playoff football. And obviously at the very tip top, you want to have February, and then you can come down from that nicely in the offseason, right? There's no end to that peak. But it's not just about the offense. But I do want to give them one more shout out because we've talked about some of the struggles they've had, the inconsistencies. This is a top 10 offense right now in both passing and rushing. They're the 4th best rushing offense in the league and the 9th best passing offense in the league. I don't know if people would tell you that, I watched this Ravens team and they're top 10 in both rushing and passing. Rushing, I think, yeah, people know that. But with Lamar having all these passing yard games, and I don't judge based off of passing yards, by the way. I do net yards per attempt because that, to me, gives a much better look. Because if you throw 500 balls compared to someone who throws 200 balls, obviously the guy with 500 balls is going to have more passing yards because it's more volume. So I want to go with net yards per attempt to kind of gauge how teams are going. Again, rushing 500 times, rushing 200 times, the guy who rushes 500 times is going to have more yards. So net yards per attempt gives me at least a better understanding of who is more efficient. The Ravens have been a very efficient offense this year, and it helps when your defense is playing historic football, doesn't it? I mean, the Ravens defense has been incredible all over the place. contributions from stars, contributions from depth pieces, unheralded signings stepping up. It's been an all-around effort, and it shows in the Ravens' net points. The Ravens' net points, so offensive points scored versus defensive points allowed, Baltimore's a plus 115. The next closest team is the Bills at 80. That's a big difference, and it shows that this defense is getting their job done. In the offense, although they have not played to the level the defense has. If you were asked, where is this Ravens team's strength right now? It is defense. It is 100% defense. They played that well. Guys are playing out of their mind. But it's not like the offense has been terrible. And when I say the offense needs to improve this and they haven't been consistent here, that's not me saying that, oh, well, they've been horrible all year and this is a bottom 5 unit. It has never been that way. Lamar Jackson has been playing well for pretty much the entire season, outside of a game here and a moment there. But he, to me, has done a great job of just kind of going with the flow. And he has kind of masked some of Baltimore's mistakes offensively this year, much like the defense has masked some of Baltimore's offensive mistakes this year as well. The defense is kind of, as I've said before, dragged this offense across the finish line in a couple of games. But if you can look, if this offense, realistically, what point total would you feel comfortable with this defense playing the way it is? If the Ravens offense scores X amount of points, is that 20 points? Is it 25 points? Is it 30 points? Look, I'm thinking if the Ravens offense can score 25 points in a game, or let's say 24. If the Ravens can score 24 points in a game, the way this defense is playing, I don't see many teams beating them. I really don't. Because, look, if the Ravens offense scores 30, I think it's wraps. I think that's what it is. But that's how it happens, because the offense, if they're rolling, if they're hitting on all cylinders, it lets your defense rest a little more and gets them a lead to play with. If the defense is hitting on all cylinders, the offense can go out there and not have to worry about getting into a shootout with the team and having to make a big play here. It's just cruise control. So complimentary football, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow. I want to kind of make a bigger deal about it on tomorrow's show. But the way that the Ravens are playing this year, it has kind of been, defense, come save us a little bit. But over the past 2 home games, it hasn't been that. The game's been over because the offense has been so efficient, and Todd Monken has shown it. Todd Monken has shown that, sometimes there are some play calling issues or some, separation issues with routes and whatnot, but he came in here not to solve the run game or anything like that. That was already established, but to give Baltimore more creativity in the passing game. So if they can start hitting on some deep shots, or some of that trickeration will start to work a little bit more consistently there, this team's going to be really, really hard to beat. And coming up in the final part of the show, we'll talk a bit about the big stretch they have upcoming and if some of those teams on the docket will be able to get the better of the Ravens, or if the Ravens are just an unstoppable force right now. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on the show. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And you can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. Plus, there's a wide range of betting options that include spreads, player props, over-unders, and a lot more. So, again, Mark Andrews catchovers on FanDuel probably won you a lot of money. If you took the Ravens, you're probably living large if you bet over on FanDuel as well. And plus, there are going to be plenty of options for this week's matchup with the Cleveland Browns. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We are back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here again. Thank you so much for tuning in today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. You can subscribe for free, both video form and audio form. Same show, so you're not missing out on anything. Really appreciate the communities we've built, audio form-wise, video form-wise, social media-wise, subtext-wise. It's been really fun to do this, and the Ravens winning, I always say, makes it a lot more fun, especially with the way that they manhandled the Seahawks on Sunday. But a point that I want to start making a little bit more often as we get later into the season is about Baltimore's upcoming stretch, the schedule that they have. Now, they've played some teams that you say, all right, you're probably supposed to win that game. Houston in week 1 should have, the Colts game was one they should have won, but woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? Tennessee, Arizona, but they have a really tough stretch of games, and that's not discounting what they've done so far. But starting here this week, well, it honestly started in week 7, but now that they have that 3-game NFC stretch and I actually put out a tweet. I said, what are the Ravens going to go in this week 7-9 stretch? And I saw a bunch of 2-1s. I saw some 3-0s. Well, it was 3-0. But Baltimore stretch from week 10 on. I'll just read every game and then we'll talk about it. Week 10 is going to be against the Browns at home. Week 11, a primetime game. The Ravens start up their primetime games. Haven't had one yet. Start them up next week. Thursday night football against the Cincinnati Bengals. Then week 12, they get the Los Angeles Chargers on Sunday night football. Now, week 13, they have the bye. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Week 14 coming off of that is the Los Angeles Rams. Week 15, it is another Sunday night football game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's away. Week 16, away at San Francisco on Monday night football. Week 17, home against the Dolphins. And week 18, home against the Steelers. That's tough. Two really tough games in Cleveland and Cincinnati. Those are divisional matchups. Those are huge, huge games if the Ravens want to win this division, especially because I talked about how every team from the North would make the playoffs if they started today. So you want to be able, especially with the way that, one, Cleveland's defense is playing, but look, Lamar Jackson torched them last time, but two, the way Cincinnati, 4-game win streak. The Ravens aren't the only ones in the North on a 4-game win streak. Cincinnati also is on one. So Joe Burrow looks to be back, and those are going to be two huge, huge games. The Chargers also, no slouches, definitely an underwhelming team, but definitely a very talented football team there. Now, week 13 with the bye, I think really benefits the Ravens right now because, look, we know football is a physical sport, right? That's no question. But having a bye later in the season, I would have preferred it probably around like week anywhere from 9 to 11. Or 9 to 12. Yeah, I'll say 9 to 12, probably, with 12 being on the very later side, or maybe even 8 to 12 if you want a little earlier. But to me, I think that a week 13 bye will give the Ravens that opportunity to rest up right at the beginning of December, while other teams have to, again, continue to grind it out, play grueling physical football. I mean, by that point, teams will have, look, the team had a week 6 bye. They're going to have been playing for a while. It's a lot of consecutive football. I think that benefits Baltimore. But coming out of that bye, it's really tough. Now, the Rams, the Ravens should probably win that game, right? But they've been a little better than I thought they would. Obviously, we'll see what the situation with Matthew Stafford is by the time those two teams face up in December. But then you have the gauntlet, the month gauntlet of Jacksonville, San Francisco, Miami, Pittsburgh. That's a tough one. Now, Baltimore can hang with all those teams. I'm not saying, the Ravens are doomed because they play good football teams. If you didn't notice, the Ravens themselves are a good football team. We've been talking about it for a while now. So those are going to be good games, hard-fought games, but we will find out a lot. It's like mini stretches. You got the 2-week stretch we have here with the divisional games. Then it's almost like the Los Angeles stretch, right? You play both Los Angeles teams in a span of 3 weeks with a bye sandwich in there. So the Los Angeles sandwich, I'll call it. You got Los Angeles Chargers by Los Angeles Rams. I'm coining that, by the way, Los Angeles sandwich. Then you got the month gauntlet at the end. So divisional stretch, Los Angeles sandwich, month gauntlet. Those are you can break it up into those three. Now, for Baltimore, AFC record is very important. But Baltimore has a lot of home games because they've traveled so much. Week 10, home. Week 11, home. Week 14, home. Week 17, home. Week 18, home. The only games they have to play on the road for the rest of the season, they got to travel to the West Coast twice. They got to play the Chargers in Los Angeles. Then they play the Jaguars in Florida. But then they have to go back to the West Coast, play the 49ers in San Francisco. And that's it. 3 road games for the rest of the season. We're in week 10. The Ravens have a plethora of games left, and they're only going to be playing 3 of them on the road. So that's a big thing. Baltimore, look, they've gone on the road. They've been road warriors this year. They're 7-2, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they were able to go to Arizona and beat the Cardinals. They went to London, a really weird, wonky travel schedule with that, and they beat the Titans. Acrisure Stadium is no easy place to play those divisional games. So it's really important, especially now as we're kind of getting later into the season. The Baltimore's done with their road divisional games. They get to play at the comfort of M&T Bank Stadium. But this is going to be obviously season-defining stretch because this team is 7-2 right now. But if something happens, if disaster falls on this team and they start to lose some close games, it could make things very interesting. But the way this defense is playing, the way the offense, as we've talked about, is ready to kind of take that ascent and hopefully take off, it's going to be very tough. The Ravens are going to be a team, assuming they do make the playoffs. I am assuming they are. But once they hit January, they're going to be as motivated as ever. It's almost like it's weird to say 2019 vibes because it's different circumstances, different situations. Lamar obviously was much younger than he is now. He's been through a little bit. But I don't know. It just feels like the team's having a lot of fun. They have depth stepping up all over the place. And they seem to be getting better with time. And obviously health is going to have to be a key thing. There's still a lot of football left, and an injury could derail the season. Now, knock on wood, obviously it does not. But there have been a lot of crazy injuries across the league, and Baltimore's had to deal with their fair share as well. But we're going to see how this team is able to maneuver through these. Again, you split it up into those 3 stretches. It's going to be really important for them, especially when you talk about an AFC conference right now that is so loaded with not only Baltimore, but Kansas City, in Miami, in Jacksonville, in Cincinnati, in Buffalo, in the Cleveland and Pittsburghs and the Chargers of the world. Those teams too, can't discount them. So this is going to be a fight to the end. I still think Baltimore has the upper hand in the division, but we're going to see over these next 2 weeks because it could very well go from, oh, they're 7-2 and have a good grip on the division to, oh, no, they lost 2 divisional games and now they're in trouble. If they can split 1-1, that's fine. Now, at that point, it's like, who would you want to lose to? Obviously, you don't want to lose to either of them, both Cleveland and Cincinnati. But Baltimore, the one team that had the most success against the Cleveland defense was the Ravens back in week 4 in Cleveland. So I have confidence they can do that. You got to block Myles Garrett. Obviously, he feasted in Zadarius Smith. That defense is so good. And Cincinnati, it's going to be a different game. Going to be definitely a different game than what we saw in week 2 because Joe Burrow is nearly as injured. I don't think he's 100%, but not nearly as injured as we saw him in week 2 at Paycor. So we'll see what happens, but Baltimore, I think, is in a good spot right now, and it's a really exciting time for this team. And coming up tomorrow, we'll be talking about more Ravens football. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Be sure to stay tuned for tomorrow's episode, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.